Good morning. The nation remembers. Americans mark the 4th anniversary of the September 11th attacks by commemorating the victims and their families.
And storm watch. Forecasters now keeping a close eye on Ophelia, now a Category 1 hurricane as it lingers in the Atlantic off the coast of the Carolinas. This as the Gulf region continues to recover in Katrina's wake. Today, Sunday, September 11th, 2005.
From NBC News, this is a special edition of Today with Campbell Brown, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza, and Lester Holt, live from New Orleans.
Welcome to Today on this Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Campbell Brown here in New York, and my colleague Lester Holt is joining us this morning from Louisiana. And today, of course, the nation is remembering the victims of the September 11th attacks 4 years later. This anniversary comes as the country is once again faced with devastation and a massive recovery operation, and another hurricane is churning off the coast. But Lester, before we get to all that, give us the latest on the hurricane relief and recovery operations there.
Well, Campbell, good morning. A lot of progress being made. I want to just add up from the top. We're in the Algiers section of New Orleans this morning, one of the few neighborhoods that was not under a mandatory evacuation order. As far as cleanup and recovery, forensic workers now are beginning to make some progress. They are beginning to collect the bodies, some that had been left out in the open, others that were inside buildings. Cleanup crews are also trying to clear out some of the debris from around the convention center and the Superdome. The death toll in Louisiana right now stands at 154 in terms of getting the water out of the city. They're making great progress there. You may recall initially they said it would be almost 3 months. Now they're looking at October 18th as a target date. That according to the Army Corps of Engineers. The airport, the New Orleans Louis Armstrong Airport, was open to traffic almost immediately in terms of cargo and relief flights. But we're now told that commercial air service is going to open on September 13th. Meantime, FEMA has issued something like $669 million to hurricane victims nationwide. Volunteers, there are tons of them here, but they still need Red Cross still says it needs 40,000 new volunteers across the Gulf Coast to help residents here in their recovery. The Mississippi death toll right now at 211. They continue to work through the debris along those coastal cities. Also want to mention that President Bush will be making his third visit to the Gulf region since the hurricane. He will be here in New Orleans later today. As far as the security situation in New Orleans, much better than it had been, although the other night before last, SWAT teams moved in after a sniper opened fire on some EMS workers. No one hurt there. They went door to door at a high-rise and ultimately arrested 2 people. But again, no injuries. Still things a bit tense. Most people out of the city, but a lot of National Guard troops and police from across the country here to keep the peace. And Campbell, we'll be back a bit later to show you a ceremony that will happen here in Algiers involving New York firefighters and other firefighters who responded. They will mark September 11th in their own way. And of course, I know that's happening in New York as well today, Campbell.
That's right, Lester. Also ahead, of course, we are going to have those ceremonies to remember the September 11th attacks. They are taking place today across the country. Moments of silence will be held. President Bush will attend services in Washington, and siblings of the victims will read aloud the names at the former site of the World Trade Center. And we're going to bring you live updates and also talk to former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Lester?
Campbell, first more on the hurricane relief efforts. On Saturday, NBC News' Ann Curry got an exclusive interview with Coast Guard Vice Admiral Thad Allen. He, of course, is the man who is now interviewing with Coast Guard Vice Admiral Thad Allen tonight on Dateline. But right now, for the rest of the day's top news stories, let's send it back to New York and MSNBC's Amy Robach. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Lester. Well, President Bush will mark the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks this morning before leaving for the Gulf Coast to tour hurricane damage. NBC's Rosalind Jordan is at the White House with more on that. Rosalind, good morning.
And good morning to you, Amy. The President and Mrs. Bush will be heading back to the Gulf Coast for a third look at the progress of the recovery effort. The President and Mrs. Bush will be in New Orleans tonight. Tomorrow they'll be in Mississippi. As you said, they are also observing the 4th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and of the plane crash in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At this hour, the President and Mrs. Bush are attending a private church service over at St. John's Church just across the way from the White House. They will be back on the south lawn of the White House at 8:46 a.m. to observe a moment of silence to pay tribute to those who were killed on September 11th, 2001. The day will also involve ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery involving the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. He will then take part in a walk paying tribute not just to the victims of September 11th, but also honoring U.S. forces, especially those serving overseas. So who will be performing at a concert at the end of that walk, country star Clint Black. Here are some of his thoughts about the performance.
I feel that it's a position of honor, and I want to do it justice. Being asked to speak to and sing to.
And superstar Clint Black. Again, President Bush and Mrs. Bush are attending a private church service. They will lead the nation in an observance of the 4th anniversary of the terrorist attacks, a challenge which the president said tested Americans' wills 4 years ago. And he says that the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina is testing that same will today. Amy.
Rosalind Jordan at the White House. Roz, thank you. In New York, families of those killed at the World Trade Center are gathered for memorial events there. NBC's Dawn Fratangelo is in Lower Manhattan. Dawn, good morning.
Good morning, Amy. It is a clear, beautiful, sunny September morning as it was 4 years ago, the day of the worst attack on American soil. As you said, family members have begun to gather here at Ground Zero, family members of the 2,749 people killed. There will be 4 moments of silence here at Ground Zero, 2 each for when each plane struck each tower, and then 2 for when each tower tragically crashed to the ground. And this year, siblings will be reading the names of those people who died, and family members, while those names are being read, will file down to Ground Zero, a place that many of these family members believe is hallowed ground here. The ceremony, Amy, is about to get underway in about 30 minutes.
All right, Dawn Fratangelo in Lower Manhattan. Thank you, Dawn. Well, Vice President Dick Cheney toured hurricane relief operations in Texas Saturday. He said the government was gaining control of the situation, but said there was a lot of work still ahead. He also thanked Texas for its help, calling it an enormous success story. That's the latest news. Now back to Campbell and Scene.
All right, Amy, thanks very much. And we want to get a look at your Sunday forecast from Steve McLaughlin. And you've been watching Hurricane Ophelia, and it is a hurricane now. Yesterday, I think it was still a tropical storm.
It's been going back and forth. It's been a hurricane since about September 8th, but it's been going back and forth from tropical storm status. But now still a Category 1 hurricane. It's spinning off the coast of the Carolinas, about 255 miles. We'll have more on Ophelia and the rest of your national forecast in the next half hour. But it's time now for your local forecast.
It's a cool start to the day across Connecticut.
After the hour, that's Check Weather. Now here's Campbell.
Scene, thanks. We turn now to today's anniversary of the horrific events of 9/11/2001. Rudolph Giuliani was the mayor of New York City during the September 11th attacks. Mayor Giuliani, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Good morning.
It strikes me that if Hurricane Katrina had not hit, that you and I this morning might be talking about how much better prepared we are now as a nation to deal with a catastrophic event. And instead, having watched what happened in New Orleans, we know how ill prepared we are. What went through your mind when you were watching the events over that first week in New Orleans?
Well, I mean, tremendous empathy and tremendous feelings that I mean, there are a lot of similarities to what we went through here in New York. So, you know, your hearts go out to the officials who had to respond, the people who were affected by it, the people who are still affected by it. And what you say is, you know, partially true and partially not. In other words, we are better prepared than we were on September 11, 2001. But that doesn't mean, as we see, that we don't have tremendous vulnerabilities. This is an enormously difficult task. I was in London on July 7, half a block away from Liverpool Station when the bomb went off, and I watched the whole response in England. And one of the things that reminded me of is our vulnerability. I mean, they have just about the best intelligence staffs and security preparations. I mean, they've got a smaller situation than we have to deal with, yet they were vulnerable. So these are things we have to learn from, and we have to keep improving.
Well, you won so much praise for your leadership in the wake of 9/11 and the aftermath and how you dealt with it and how you handled it. What should they have done in New Orleans that they didn't do in those first weeks?
Oh, gosh, it's way too early to do that. I mean, the Monday morning quarterbacking that's gone on, I don't know that it's all that helpful at this point. I mean, the fact is these people need a lot of help. They need a lot of support. They need a lot of assistance. We did. We would not have gotten through it, meaning New York. I'm sure this is true of Washington and Shanksville, too, without the help of a lot of people And the criticisms came later. The criticisms, and many of them were correct ones. I mean, there were things that were done right on September 11, things that were done wrong, and then the September 11 Commission stood back and gave us a very, very interesting...
Always great to get your insight.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. God bless.
And Lauren Kiefer Foley and Chris Burke are joining us now. They both lost their brothers on 9/11 and are going to be taking part in today's ceremony honoring them. And good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Lauren, let me begin with you. I know you and your brother Burke and Lauren Kiefer Foley, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.
In the days after Katrina hit, officials feared the death toll here could rise to 10,000. But rescue workers right now seem to be finding fewer bodies than anticipated, giving hope that the number of lives lost may be lower than expected. Still, rescue and recovery is difficult and it is dangerous work. We tagged along with one crew yesterday as New Orleans' slow recovery continues. Workmen
help make it better. A little bit we can contribute.
And we'll be right back.
Hey guys.
In recent days, we've all been stunned and saddened by the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina. The storm has claimed lives and left thousands of Americans without a place to call home. Now, NBC 30 and the American Red Cross are asking for you.
Still ahead, more on the 9/11 commemorations. We're going to bring you live updates.
Also, New York firefighters had another disaster on this 9/11 anniversary, and the story of a fire truck that turns out to be the gift that keeps on giving. But first, these messages and your local news.
Sister, we're closed.
Welcome back to Today on this Sunday morning. I'm Campbell Brown here in New York. My colleague Lester Holt is joining us from Louisiana. As the nation commemorates the victims of the September 11th attacks today, many Americans are also expressing their support and sympathy for those in the devastated Gulf Coast region today as well. And Lester, give us a sense for what the mood is there this morning.
Anniversary, Campbell.
And coming up, Lester, we're going to bring you more on today's 9/11 anniversary, including live coverage of the ceremony that is taking place at Ground Zero this morning also. Lester?
I want to show you the crowd that's gathered here. These are firefighters, I mentioned, from all over the country, 300 of them from New York City who could never have imagined being in New Orleans on this date. But we've got folks from California, Alhambra, California, the Forest Service, Santa Barbara, California. In a moment, there is going to be a special mass and service. We're at the Lady of Holy Cross College here in Algiers, and they will have the ceremony there. The flags and that shield constructed on site here by New York firefighters, some of whom were at the scene in 9/11 at Ground Zero 4 years ago. Interesting story about this fire truck, Campbell. This was a fire truck that people of Louisiana donated to the New York Fire Department after the September 11th disaster. New York lost over 100 of its rigs, so they came up with the money, about $500,000. They dedicated it to the state of Louisiana, Spirit of Louisiana. Well, firefighters from New York brought it down here, and they're going to leave it. It is the gift that keeps on giving. This truck with Vincent Morello, one of the New York firefighters, the name on the side of it. It will be left here in New Orleans. The New Orleans Fire Department lost some of its vehicles from flooded fire stations. So there is this brotherhood of firefighters. We saw it at work 4 years ago in New York, and they have come together again here in a time of need. We'll talk to a couple of firefighters coming up this half hour about the experience, what it means to be with their brothers again and sisters in dealing with another major national catastrophe. We'll get to that coming up, but right now let's get a check of the other top news stories of the day, and for that we go back to MSNBC's Amy Robach at the news desk. Amy, good morning again.
Good morning again, Lester. Well, President Bush is leading the nation today in a moment of silence marking the 4th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Memorial ceremonies are also being held at the site of the Twin Towers in New York, Arlington National Cemetery, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 Americans were killed in those attacks. Pope Benedict today offered prayers for the victims of 9/11 and called for an end to hatred.
Today, 11 September, we remember the victims of terrorist violence throughout the world. May God inspire men and women of goodwill everywhere to renounce hatred and to build a world of justice, solidarity, and peace.
The Pope made his remarks to pilgrims gathered outside his summer residence near Rome. Well, there are reports today of an al-Qaeda plot to kill British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Newly published memoirs of London's former police chief say Blair was a target of terrorists 2 years ago. And the Senate begins this week hearings on President Bush's nomination of John Roberts to succeed William Rehnquist as Chief Justice of the United States. NBC's Justice correspondent Pete Williams reports.
John Roberts will face the first Supreme Court confirmation hearings in more than 11 years, the first for a Chief Justice in nearly 2 decades. And if he's confirmed, he'd be the youngest Chief Justice in almost 200 years.
I am honored and humbled by the confidence that the president has shown in me.
The views he expressed as a young lawyer working in the Reagan administration in the early 1980s. In legal memos, he was critical of racially based News, Washington.
Police in Northern Ireland are calling Saturday's rioting the worst outbreak of religious violence in recent years. Authorities say the violence erupted after the Protestant Orange Order was blocked from marching in a Catholic neighborhood. Demonstrators are accused of wounding more than a dozen police officers and civilians. And talks aimed at ending a 3-week strike by Northwest mechanics broke off this morning. Meanwhile, a Northwest Airlines plane was forced to make an emergency landing in St. Louis Saturday. The plane was flying from Memphis to Minneapolis when it experienced landing gear problems. That is the latest news. Now back to Campbell and Scene.
Amy, thanks very much. And seeing you and I were just talking hurricanes.
Yeah.
That's all we're talking
What
about
else
these
to
days.
talk about?
But last hurricane season, it was November 30th. You told me, and Otto was the final storm, the final named storm.
Yeah,
in
our O
O.
storm.
We're already at O, and it's September.
September already, and it's just a kind of a stark reminder of how long we have yet to go in this 2005 hurricane season. Already a record breaker. We've never reached 15 named storms this fast, 7 of them already hurricanes. The record number of storms was 21 back in 1933, even before they started naming storms. And again, the hurricane season stretches to November 30th. Here's the latest on Ophelia, 255 miles east-southeast of Charleston, South Carolina. It's a Category 1, sustained winds 85 miles an hour. Here's the problem, little change in strength, and it's going to be stationary at least for today and tomorrow. Then we think it's going to start to move early this week, Tuesday or Wednesday, heading towards the Carolina coastline. There's a hurricane watch in effect from Edisto Beach all the way up to Cape Lookout, North Carolina through tonight. Look for that to change. High surf, look at these rip currents coming in. That's a big problem right along those beautiful Carolina beaches. There's a coastal flood watch for southeastern North Carolina. Rip currents are possible as far north as the Virginia coastline. Of course, if you get caught in a rip current, if you're out there, go parallel to the shoreline. And there's a quick check of today's forecast. You want a parallel? How about snow in Montana? 6 to 10 inches of it above 6,000 feet. So, and at 37 minutes after the hour, we'll toss it back to Campbell.
All right, Scene, thanks very much. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Do anything to help you? Well, just keep me in your prayers.
America watches today.
Have your officers had to use force to remove anyone so far?
First.
We're going to get you out of here, get you some clothes, and get you something to eat, okay?
America's #1 morning show. This is Today on NBC.
If there was a season premiere.
We're going to get more now on Hurricane Ophelia. The storm is lingering in the Atlantic Ocean, and forecasters say it could turn toward the coast early this week. Joining us this morning is the mayor of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Mark McBride, which is Myrtle.
Well, our prayers go out to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and now the people in North Carolina.
All right, we appreciate it. And as residents along the coast keep a watch on Ophelia, the nation, of course, is marking the 4th anniversary of the September 11th attacks today. Ceremonies are being held here in New York, in Washington, D.C., and in other cities across the country. And NBC's Dawn Frantangelo is at Ground Zero for us this morning. She's joining us live. Dawn, good morning to you.
Good morning, Campbell. Hundreds are gathered here this morning at Ground Zero on this strikingly beautiful September morning, so reminiscent of 4 years ago. The ceremony began a few moments ago with bagpipers and drummers carrying the World Trade Center flag to the stage. You may remember that flag came to symbolize strength and endurance as workers placed it there in what was the rubble of the 2 twin towers. The first moment of silence will take place at 8:46, marking when American Airlines Flight number 11 hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A moment that unfolded and changed this country forever. The president will also be marking this moment of silence from the South Lawn at the White House. Family members after that will then file down to pay their respects to those who lost their lives here. The moment of silence.
Today, again, we are a city that meets in sadness. We come here to remember the names of those we lost 4 years ago. The greatest honor we can do them is to remember them, not just as they were in death, but as they were in life. We have asked our sisters and brothers, those who grew up with them in childhood and who knew them in the prime of their lives, to lead today's ceremonies. At this time, please join us and all New Yorkers in a moment of silence. The ties between brothers and sisters are special ones. Their lives are intertwined from childhood, sharing a common bond of parents and the years.
Introduced by Mayor Mike Bloomberg at Ground Zero to observe the time when the first plane hit the World Trade Center's North Tower 4 years ago today. We should remind folks that President Bush will be heading to Louisiana later today. You saw him with the First Lady, Vice President Cheney, and his wife Lynn Cheney there at the White House also observing that moment. We'll be back right after this.
Morning.
Welcome back to Algiers, Louisiana, where a special mass being celebrated right now and ceremony marking the 9/11 anniversary here. A lot of New York firefighters and firefighters from around. It is a special bond. A lot of men and women here for this mass right now from fire departments across the country. They have different logos, but they are cut from the same cloth. Some brave people who do some very dangerous work, and right now they're honoring the 343 New York firefighters who lost their lives 4 years ago. At the same time, a moment of reflection of what they've done here in the last 2 weeks and what lies ahead, pulling together as a giant community, a giant country to help New Orleans get back on its feet. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Now let's check in with NBC's Tim Russert to see what's coming up on Meet the Press. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Campbell. Hurricane Katrina, day 13, an exclusive interview with the mayor of New Orleans, Ray Nagin. He's being criticized for not evacuating the city earlier. How goes the recovery? Also, the Supreme Court hearings begin tomorrow on John Roberts' attempt to succeed William Rehnquist as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Another exclusive interview with the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania. Hurricane Katrina, the Supreme Court, a special edition of Meet the Press, Campbell.
All right, NBC's Tim Russert. Thanks very much, Tim. And Lester, I want to head back down to you in New Orleans, where I know the next week or so are going to be very difficult because of the recovery effort as they bring in many of the bodies.
Yeah, they started the recovery of the bodies, and as we mentioned right now, this moment of reflection, 9/11, but in another hour or so, these firefighters will be back out there helping New Orleans get back on its feet. The immediate urgency is now gone to now a steady kind of a crisis management, and we'll be here to cover it all. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Lester, stay safe.
This has been a presentation of NBC News. More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.
Looking for morning TV that's better than good? This week, Live for Today. Al's with Martha Stewart on day one of her new show. Plus, Gwyneth Paltrow, Mark Ruffalo, Reese Witherspoon. And you're invited to Sarah and Mark's hometown wedding. Trisha Yearwood sings, and you decide the honeymoon. We've got it all on Today.
Straight ahead on NBC 30 Connecticut.